Thank you so much for coming to check out another episode of the Stash Cast, where we have interesting conversations with interesting people focused on the world of commercial real estate and prop tech. The Stash Cast is brought to you by Needle. What if you could use data and analytics to predict real estate transactions? You can with Needle. Come check it out at Needle, NEDL.us to learn more. All right, I'm super excited for today's conversation. I've got Cody Shandraw, who is the president and co-founder of Healing Realty Trust with us today. We had a pre-interview call last week and I didn't know what to expect, and we got into it and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So with that, Cody, why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, brother. I'm telling you, you're missing a big marketing play. I think it's either stacking cash with stash or the stash cash. I'm not sure which one, but
Yeah.
I think that there's an opportunity there. So, Healing Realty Trust, it was actually a brainchild I run with another one of the co-founders, a VC fund focused on emerging medicine opportunities, mainly in the psychedelic as medicine space. And after a couple of years of our portfolio companies doing their year-end audits, we started to notice some trends, specifically around operators were needing to raise large amounts of capital for real estate deployment. And unfortunately, as a shareholder, became painfully obvious that sometimes doctors aren't the best real estate investors or stewards of money to be driven towards real estate opportunities. Having invested quite significantly into the cannabis space, we've seen the opportunity for the picks and shovels play, right? Like you had a lot of the bigger operators in the cannabis space that were raising hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes to deploy into retail, cultivation, manufacturing, and there wasn't really a real estate provider that was dedicated specifically towards that vertical. And then a company popped up called IIPR, and Innovative Industrial Properties is traded today. I think they're on the New York Stock Exchange, maybe, or maybe NASDAQ, but they have far and away exceeded all of the operators in the cannabis space because they strictly had one focus, and that was on good real estate for those operators. So took some of the lessons learned from there. Anytime there's an emerging industry, the bricks and sticks side is always going to be there. And that was it, right? It was, we wanted to have a vehicle that physicians across the country, whether they're doing mental and behavioral health, whether it's a psychedelic assisted therapy center, whether it's a physical therapy center, sports medicine clinic, you name it. We even have dialysis clinics. If it is not a hospital system, we want to be the go-to provider of turnkey real estate for these types of practices. And that was really how the company was born.
That's amazing. I guess part of that is probably because there's risk associated. I guess you said it was doctors who are trying to figure out how to find the best real estate. And sometimes doctors, in my experience, they think they know everything and don't necessarily, because they got an MD and they're told through that, oh, hey, you're the smartest guy in the room. Doesn't necessarily transfer to real estate.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny. And listen, I think there is something to be said about specializing in what you do. I would never want my accountant taking care of my broken bones. So I wouldn't expect my doctor to be the best real estate
Right.
investor in the world. So yeah, it's one of those things that I think gets forgotten about. A lot of these physicians, you're starting to see like that great retirement wave of kind of like those legacy practitioners that were like GPs for their communities. You're starting to see a lot of younger doctors start to enter the space, and a lot of these guys are very entrepreneurial. They want to expand, they want to grow their footprint to multiple locations, they want to bring other young doctors on, maybe offer additional services. And that was having that type of opportunity for them where it's taken out of their hands now. Listen, I'm going to send you a copy of my financials, and this is where I want to be. This is the type of income that I'm looking for in the areas that I want to explore. Is what I want my building to look like. And you guys take the reins and drive the ship across now.
That's a great business model, even of itself, just saying, hey, we're a tailored solution just for medical practices. But you guys have taken it a step beyond that, haven't you?
Yeah, so my background's in data and obviously needle. You and I geeked out there for a little bit after our first call.
Yeah.
I, I'm really amazed. Running a VC fund and then serving as director of business development for a very large family office about a decade ago. I've gotten to see just about everything you could possibly imagine, whether it's pharmaceutical, whether it's technology for financial services. I've looked at such a wide array, even the cannabis that we just talked about. Technology has really disrupted and optimized almost every industry across the planet. Real estate has been slow in a lot of cases to adopt new technologies, right? So one of the things that's our core principles is we really focus on a data-driven approach for every single site that we select. If Dr. Johnson comes to our office and wants to sit down and open up 3 additional centers over the next 24 months, before we even start looking for buildings, what we do is we aggregate a full list of everything that they're looking for and then some additional layers. For example, we have an operator in Southwest Florida, currently own 5 clinics, want to open up another 5 clinics in the next 12 months. And they had a very short list of things. They wanted to be close to VA hospitals and they wanted the average income per household to be above $80,000. Those are 2 very simple target points. This clinic chain specifically focuses on mental health. So now we can overlay publicly available information, whether it's GPS data. So now I can find a clinic that's within a 10-minute drive of the local VA hospital. I can overlay mental and behavioral health statistics, number of mental health days per 100,000 in that community. So we can get super granular based on what type of doctor they are, what type of population they're looking for, patients, what type of community they want to be located in. So that is a really important piece of what we do. It's not buying real estate just to buy real estate. We use over 1,000 different data points that we overlay as we're selecting pieces of property for our portfolio.
That's great. And so you have practices that are like, hey, we want to expand and here are our criteria. And then I'm sure you can probably even help them elaborate on what some of their criteria should be if they haven't even considered it.
It really is. It's almost information paralysis for some of these guys, man. Once you start opening up the toolbox a little bit and letting them start play around with all the different metrics that they can plug into, I've had 10-minute conversations turn into 2-hour conversations because they want to go so deep into the data.
Right.
It's the amazing thing, right? Human beings love access to information. Like we literally carry computers around with supercomputers around with us
Right.
every day now. It's just being able to refine all of that information into one concise picture is sometimes difficult. We built a back end and a user interface. So now, doctors can specifically just look for certain little bullet points and data points that they didn't even know that was an option for them to look at when they're trying to select a new community to open up a practice in. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun watching their eyes get. Obviously, these guys are very well educated. When you throw something like it's simplified in front of them, they love it, man. It's a great tool to have, and I think it's really one of the things that gives us a huge competitive advantage of anybody else in the market today.
Yeah, for sure. And I think so. I think I know why commercial real estate has been slow to adopt data, but I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Why do you think, from your seat, your opinion, why do you think they've been so slow to adopt it?
I'm new in the game, 2 years. So I think it gives a different perspective, right? Just because I haven't lived and breathed this my entire professional career, like a lot of people have. Listen, what has worked for a very long time is very difficult to get. If you've made money for 20 years selecting real estate, long-term value creation, why would you change that? But if I could show you a way to increase performance financially 15, 20, 30% higher, why would you not want to do that? So number one, I think just because the foundation is already built and they're just adding on top of it, they don't see a need to change. I think that's one of the big things. Number two, listen, I think that there is a We talked about the old guard being passed, right? With the doctors. I think it's the same thing in real estate. You've had a lot of very successful people that have made a lot of money for a very long time. You only know what you know, right? So if this is how you've been working for the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years in some cases, they don't feel a need to change. So a lot of the innovation that I've seen, at least over the last couple of years, has come from, again, younger and a little bit more entrepreneurial opportunities. And it's the same reason that, you ask somebody, I've had attorneys that still use fax machines. Like it's what they know, it's what they use.
Right.
A lot of guys just don't want to fix what isn't broken. You know what I mean? The difference in making an extra 15% might not matter that much to them if it changes their whole way of life and how the business operates. And now I got to bring in a tech guy, and a lot of them just don't see the need for it. So I think it's really, in my opinion, it's those two things mainly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that if the old way has worked for so long,
Don't fix it if it ain't broken, my brother,
right? Yeah, and oh, I have to go out and learn a new system. And for a long time, like the data wasn't that great.
So that's actually a great point. And you and I even talked about this too, talking back to our first call. There, the number one, the data isn't amazing, but number two, the data that is being aggregated right now isn't put into a place where it's concise, easy to read, and tells a picture that you want to see. So I think that is also another huge piece, man. I don't see, there isn't really anybody that is refining. I did have an opportunity. I don't know if I can even say their name. They're a very,
Admit it.
very,
Yeah.
yeah, they're a very large broker network across the United States. And they did have a very cool data tool. And I was talking to their CTO about it, and it was 11 years of development that they put into that. And he said that the price tag on it was almost unbelievable for that long.
Yeah, I believe it. There is a lot of data out there, but then figuring out, is it good or is it
Yep.
junk? That's one thing. And then how do you appropriately manipulate it to get actionable insights out of it? That's a whole
Yeah.
other thing.
That's the secret sauce, buddy. I think that is one of the, over the next 5 years, I think it's going to be a revolution in the data set. And you're already starting to see it. And I know that this is outside of my wheelhouse because it's not medical office, but dude, look around the country right now. You see some of these buildings that were sold for hundreds of millions of dollars, in some case, a billion plus. And now they're literally getting bought out of bankruptcy for 95% less than what they
Yeah.
last sold for. Had some analytics been used when that original deal had been done, you wonder how different some of these high default rates in specific markets. I wonder how different that landscape could have looked today had some of those tools been used earlier on.
Yeah, I had this almost exact conversation yesterday with somebody, and he's, what's going to happen with all these office buildings? And I was like, you can't, some of them can be repurposed, but some of them can't. Either it's clear height between decks isn't there, or we have a beautiful old building here in downtown Cincinnati. It's called the Carew Tower, and it's like a signature building in the skyline, but they have columns so the column width is prohibitive.
Dude, so Buffalo, where I grew up, I was just back there last month, and the HSBC arena, they are right outside of there is the HSBC Bank Tower, and they just took, I think, 70% of the building and converted it to residential.
Yeah.
I don't see, listen, everybody was like, oh, the work from home trend, it's going to come back and you need to be in the office. And I think for a lot of businesses, that is absolutely true. I think for 30 to 50% of them, I don't think technology has just really changed the way that businesses operate. And if you have a good team and a good management team behind them, I really think that working from home is advantageous for a lot of people. And I think productivity, again, and it comes down to the team that you have in place being able to manage that. But as long as you're tracking your KPIs, at least I've seen this personally. When we cut down our office in San Diego, our performance went up almost 30% within the first 12 months, man.
Interesting.
People are happy to be at home. They don't have to. There were days where it'd take me an hour to drive to work and then 2 hours to drive home, man, with
Yeah.
traffic. Like that kills motivation sometimes.
And just sitting in traffic is draining.
Oh, it's the worst. It's the
Yeah.
worst.
Huh. That's really interesting.
You know?
Because I guess you've seen or heard both sides of since, because COVID is really what sparked the work from home.
Oh
Because
yeah.
we all
That's
had to.
yep. Changed everything.
Like we had Teams for probably a year before COVID and nobody used it. Nobody knew
No.
what it was. And then one day you're forced, okay, we're how do we communicate? And
So I was joking with my wife. I miss the days of just dialing into a conference call, and I know I shouldn't say this, in a t-shirt and my underwear. Right? Yeah, when nobody could see what you were doing, what you
right.
looked like. You didn't have to shave. That has its benefits. It also has its cons. It's one of those things. But I will tell you, it is amazing being able to have conversations and see people's faces. We have members of our team on the West Coast that sometimes I didn't get to see from weeks at a time. I moved to Florida back in 2014, and it was literally I got to see him when I flew out there once a month, and being able to see everybody every day it's nice, man. It creates a level of connection that I think the phone calls just didn't do before.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It does. It does. Yeah, you get to see people as you're speaking with them and just have conversations, which is better
Yeah.
than because sometimes some of those conference calls, it was chaotic. Who's speaking? Who's
Oh,
even here? You don't
dude.
even know.
Yeah, 34 numbers dial into a conference call. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's
Right.
yeah, so it has definitely made from an East standpoint, it's changed just the ability for teams to work much easier, spread across geographic locations.
So back to Healing Realty Trust. So are you guys focused on a specific type, or you're just saying we're going after all medical office professionals that are not associated with a large network?
So surprisingly, dude, we have DaVita dialysis centers in our portfolio. We have a Baptist Health System. We'll work with large networks. We're just never going to be the guy that's going to go and build or buy a hospital for you. I would say our threshold, like that sweet spot, is really that $3 to $15 million range. We'll go as high as 25 million and as low as a million, but I would say that those are special circumstances. A lot of people don't realize the medical office building market, I think it's 18 or 19% are hospital systems. The rest of that are smaller types of medical office buildings. That for us is the market share is huge. And again, you look at the big players in the space, whether it's Sabra's, the Well Towers, they're focused on those large properties. So it leaves a really large void. There really isn't anybody at scale that's doing these types of properties. So for us, number one, I like the diversification. I think it presents a very unique risk management for us, right? Because we're not really locked into any one geographic location. Acquiring diverse locations, diverse tenants, it reduces the impact of, God forbid, any local economic downturns in one region, right? Growing up in Western New York, man, I seen it firsthand. Both of my grandfathers worked for Bethlehem Steel Plant in Buffalo, and once all the plants, my uncle worked at GM for 46, 47 years. When those places start to close or downsize, it has a very big impact on everybody, not just housing, not just commercial. It's everything. So I don't ever want to be super concentrated in one area.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a whole other subject. The company towns that essentially were built up and at, around an industry, and then that industry closes and you're screwed. Sorry,
Yeah,
guys.
man.
We're out.
Yeah. I got to see that firsthand. So that really influenced. There's been investors that have been like, oh man, we've gotten smoked buying, whether they're maybe the big developer in their town or their city. And they've had to live through those downturn cycles. And if you don't have the cash on hand to do that, it could get ugly quick.
Mhm.
So from obviously being in a portfolio management position for a decade, risk management's a big part of what I did. And that's a big focus for us here too.
Mhm. How did you get into the VC space initially?
So I was actually I started a tech company down here in South Florida in 2008. Was acquired by a company called TK Car Sites out of Southern California. So it developed a series of web crawlers that was going through and aggregating data, primarily in Southern Florida, and then obviously that went national after the company was acquired. And after joining a small company, man, it was me and two other guys. And then after that kind of happened, I went to an office that was 158, I think, employees. It was a big operation, and realized the big corporate environment just, and I don't know if it was my ego because I was so young, but I just didn't love having a boss and hours. If I want to show up at work at 5 a.m. when the office is closed, that doesn't work for me. Or if I want to stay there till 11 o'clock at night, I want to be able to do that. And big corporate environment just didn't really fit in. I left there and then went to another company called 29 Prime. I was employee number 6 there. After 12 months, ended up moving my way up to a partner role, headed up all of our cash generating activities. So new offices, hiring, and then within 12 months, we became the 6th fastest growing company in the country. And that was mainly targeted towards SEO, SEM, and data for small to mid-sized businesses across the United States. And was lucky enough to also have a buyout there and decided, listen, I've seen a lot of different things across a pretty wide spectrum in a very short period of time, and decided I wanted to help smaller business owners grow and I see their dreams and their business. There's nothing more special, man, than watching somebody. That's one of the reasons why I like doing this with the doctors. Watching their dreams grow is a really special thing. A lot of the times they're family members, friends, work with them, and it's just uh, other people's success is it's an important part of why I do what I do. And that really drove me to the VC side. So I started a small family office myself, choosing my own capital, Shandraw Capital. And then I joined up with another partner that I was doing a lot of deals with. And that was really the birth of my VC career.
That's awesome. Were you investing in were you just following the tail of the technologies that you're familiar with and investing in those sorts of things?
I, Originally, yes. And then again, I don't know if it was just a blind faith. Did I listen? I love reading. I never went to college, so I've always tried to self-educate myself. And I really believe that staying up to date of news and trends and things like that has been one of the keys to success that I've had. And so we've followed new industries, man, really early on with kind of the tech industry, really early with the crypto industry, early with the cannabis industry, early with the psychedelics as medicine industry, even invested in some renewable energy sources. So I've always tried to be that tip of the spear. And listen, obviously, big wins also have big losses. There's been a lot of things that we got into too late or were too early for market adoption. It's just one of those things, man. You got to swing for the fences. You're going to hit some home runs and you're also going to strike out here and there. That was also another thing, too, that I think made me love the VC side so much is I've never been a guy that has hung my head on a loss. I always anytime a strikeout has occurred, I always know that I'm that much closer to a home run in the next one. Again, back to that blind faith toward that aspect. I love that, man. It's a special part of what I do, I think.
That's really cool. I like that story.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons we like each other, my family's from Western New York. My dad's side, he grew up
Yep.
in Cheektowaga. So we're probably
And
cousins. We don't even know
yeah,
it.
probably, man. Listen, us Polacks run deep in that area. It's
Right.
just so half of my family is all Cheektowaga, and the other half is all West Seneca. So it's
That's so funny.
yeah, man. I graduated from West Seneca East High School.
Okay. Yeah, I ended up going to school in upstate New York. I went to St. Lawrence up there. And I think my Mike Reed was my freshman year roommate. I think he was from Buffalo. I don't know if he was from Cheektowaga or not, but
Yeah, so
yeah,
I went to Cheektowaga for elementary school.
that's probably the same school my dad went to, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, it's not, man. It's an old school. Like you can feel a lot of people don't realize Western New York is so old. I think Western New York was the first city that had like full electricity, dude, because it was the connecting point between the
Oh,
West and the East Coast. So like everything there is so old, man. Like the schools, everything. Like my
That makes a lot of
Grandfather,
sense. Okay.
yeah, my grandfather, my mother's side, my dad, all my uncles, my aunt on her side, and then on my dad's side, my dad, my aunt, we all went to the same elementary school.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about.
Yeah. Speaking of that, completely off subject. I listen to a lot of books on Audible or talks on YouTube, things like that. But there was a book I listened to that I think you might find interesting. It's called The Power Broker. And it was about this guy named Robert Moses. And he's basically the one that built all of New York City, all the parks and parkways. And he also had a big role in, I think, some of the stuff out in Western New York. And I think he built some dams up in St. Lawrence County and all that. It's a long one. Buckle up,
Yeah,
but it's interesting.
send me the title of that. I'd be very interested in reading that.
Yeah, it's cool. Anyway, back on subject. So being, and I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but you guys led off the conversation last time with ketamine therapy, and you were just talking about being at the forefront of that. So do you want to get into that or no?
I'd love to. So that was really like that was the formation behind this company, to be completely honest with you. Again, our VC fund from 2019 to I think Q4 of 21 or maybe Q1 of 22. We have 53 portfolio companies in that space, spread out across 117 investments in every vertical that you could think of inside of there, from the drug developers, the technology supporting the space, the clinicians that were delivering the medicine. And ketamine was so Janssen originally developed an intranasal ketamine drug called Spravato. Johnson & Johnson bought that drug right before it was to be commercialized. And in 2019, that drug was approved for use. So all of these ketamine clinics started popping up across the country. In 2019, I think there were 81 or 82 clinics in the United States. Today, there are 2,700 of them. Wow. And yeah, the growth has been unbelievable. And I think, obviously, again, I live and breathe that space, so I'm probably a little bit more optimistic than most, but I think we're probably going to see another 5 to 7,500 of those clinics pop up. It drastically changed the way that psychiatrists were treating their patients, right? Like the average psychiatry visit before that was launched was like 27 minutes long. Think of a small office, maybe 12 by 12, a desk, a couch, a chair, and that was really it. And it was a turn and burn, right? Like the
You're saying
average
with ket.
No, this is before ketamine.
Okay.
So before, if you've seen 8 to 12 patients a day, that was a good day for you. And again, at 27 minutes a visit, you could see a lot of people in a day if you worked an 8-hour day, right? Spravato really changed the way that these physicians laid out. And I think that's why you've seen such explosive growth of the industry, is because the real estate just didn't have time to catch up. So after an administration of Spravato, patients needed to be in the clinic for 2 hours. So it drastically changed the need of psychiatry and how their offices were laid out. Because again, if you were seeing, let's just even say 8 patients a day in an 8-hour period with the average 27-minute visit, now if that patient needed to be on your couch or in a chair for 2 hours, you're now seeing 4 people a day. Right. So they couldn't make the economics work. So what that created was a redesign of the layout of psychiatry centers that were offering these therapies or wanted to offer these therapies, but didn't have the space. So now what you'll traditionally see for a psychiatry office that has, Spravato as a modality of treatment is administration rooms. So 2 to 4 administration rooms per doctor. And then they'd have a spillover room. So I could go in, administer you your Spravato dose. After 20 to 30 minutes, you're out of the experience, but you still need to be inside of my clinic for another 90 minutes. So now I'd set up a nice room in the front of the office. I had couches, chairs, music, soft lighting, maybe a TV. And now you could still see the same volume of patients, but you're still in the regulatory framework of these patients are still under my care for these 2 hours. So it caused a big redesign. And that's why you're starting to see as many of these clinics pop up, is because the foundation has been built now. Now physicians know what these clinics need to look like in order to
Right.
operate at their existing base level of how they were treating patients and in what volumes they were treating those patients.
And I am not an expert on this either, and recognize that you probably have a better understanding than I do. What is ketamine therapy?
Ketamine therapy it's funny because ketamine gets lumped into the psychedelics as medicine space, and it's really not a classic psychedelic. It doesn't act on the 5-HT2B receptor in your brain. It's a disassociate, but you go into a almost psychedelic type of state while you're disassociated. Ketamine is obviously a remarkably safe drug. It's been used for decades. It's still used today as an anesthetic for child surgeries, things like that, veterinary surgery. So it's a super safe drug. Half-life is super short. But what it does is it allows, if you're going through a very traumatic event in your life, to pause for a second, disassociate from trauma, behavioral issues, things like that, and then come back and have a full, long discussion with your therapist if you've had that chance to have the reset. Dr. Robin Carhart Harris, actually, I think it's the best explanation. Think of a snow globe, right? If you're constantly walking through the same 4 trails, there's going to be no snow in those trails. Think of ketamine as shaking the snow globe, so now you can create some new trails to walk through. It's a great way to describe what that does to the patients.
That makes a lot of sense. I used to smoke a lot of weed when I was in high school and especially in college. And what the thing that I liked about it was it helped you. I use the analogy of I felt like it would help me pull back from reality almost a little bit. But whereas without it, your face is up against the fishbowl and you're just going at life 100 miles an hour. And that helps you just pull back and gain some perspective. And so I imagine it's probably not the same, but that that's the
You
analogy
know,
spinning in my head.
yeah, and listen, I think you're absolutely correct. Listen, think of zoom out. Historically, every culture throughout history, whether it's South America and ayahuasca, whether it's Northern Europe and alcohol or Amanita muscaria mushrooms or Africa and ibogaine, like there are these substances that you can alter your state of consciousness. And it seems to be a it's not even a uniquely human experience, right? Like cats eat catnip, dolphins bite puffer fish. Like I think anything that has a certain level of consciousness, like altering that consciousness seems to be it's just a part of that experience as a living creature. So I think that there is something to that. And I think that kind of walking away and being able to zoom out a little bit is really important just for everything, man. Better relationships, better business. I think it's a really important piece. I wish I had the words to properly describe what that is, but I just don't. It's just something we do, and it's spread across every region of the world.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. I listened to a book about the uh, beginnings of Christianity, and the speculation is that it
Mushroom and
started.
the Sacred Cross.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I have that book up there.
Yeah. And that was fascinating. And then they also were talking about the wheat, forget, but
Lysergic acid.
yeah. And so it was those things that they figured out, okay, if we distill it or manipulate it in some ways, it's going to cause a mind altering event, and um, we're going to see God.
What's funny, I was at a talk in, I don't know if it was Denver at the MAPS conference, but I was at a conference and they think that's what the Salem like witch trials, they think that there was ergot poisoning, and
That's what
that
it was.
is yes, and they think that was what created these people to laugh and go crazy, and that's what they think that was, is they were like literally hallucinating
They're probably
during
not
that.
wrong. If they were wheat farmers, then that's what ergot is. So,
Yeah.
huh. Yeah, I think it's good. And then you had all the mind altering substances created as Schedule Ones back in what, the late 60s, early 70s,
Yep.
and just stopped all the research. And if mushrooms have been around, for instance, or other mind altering things have been around, it doesn't necessarily make them bad. You just need to understand how to use them appropriately, and not abuse it specifically.
I think that that's a very important piece. And it's funny, if you go back to the literature, like during that period before that rescheduling happened, dude, a lot of these things were held as miracle drugs. Like a lot of people don't. AA was originally like the plan was you were going to take a high dose of LSD before you started AA. A lot of people don't know that. MDMA was considered a miracle drug for psychiatry when that first came on the scene. It's like a lot of these things, man, like there is prior art of them being used successfully in a medicinal setting.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of these things were tied up with the hippie movement at the time and culturally with Vietnam and the anti-war protesters. Obviously, this being a free country, right to protest is there. So how do you get all of these people looped in as criminals? Very easy to regulate some of the things that they were using at the time. And I think that was a big piece of why a lot of those were scheduled the way that they were.
And if things are changing so quickly and rapidly, what's a great way to control the whole population and keep it from spreading? You just put a cap on it. And it's taken a little while, but in the grand scheme of things, maybe it's not that long, 50 years, 60 years, but
Long time, buddy.
long time in our life, but
Yeah.
in the scheme of human life or human history.
Yeah, it's nothing. It's a blip on the radar.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Fascinating. So,
And what's even crazier, man, is like we talked about the 2 hours for ketamine that you need to be in clinic. So the next two drugs that are up are number one is by a company called Lycos Therapeutics. They're doing MDMA for PTSD treatment. That's being reviewed by the FDA currently. I think that they're granting a decision on that August 11th. That you will need to be inside of a clinic for 6 to 8 hours. So think about what that's going to do from a requirement standpoint for real estate. Talking about a whole new class.
oh my God, that's what we do with all these office buildings. We just create raves out of them.
That's gonna be it, buddy. Fancy lights, nice couches. That's probably what we're gonna be seeing.
Yeah. So inside the ketamine therapy offices, like how are they set up? Like you're administered a dose, it's a nasal inhalant, and then you're just hanging out. Like,
Yeah, so normally they have zero gravity chairs. Obviously, they want you to be very comfortable while you're going through. It's normally a dimly lit room. They normally soundproof it so you don't have any outside interference with your experience. And then there's a waiting room, nurse's station, doctor's office. I'd say probably the average is like 2,200 to 3,000 square feet. They're not huge offices, but then you see what we've seen from the most successful chains across the country is that kind of 3,000 square foot. And what they'll do is they'll really look for one area, whether it's like Western New York, great example. So they do Niagara Falls, they do downtown Buffalo, they probably do Cheektowaga, Orchard Park, and then they'll set up all these little satellite offices as like a hub and spoke model. And then they'll have one main center in the city. They'll have psychiatrists kind of manage each office, each patient, and that's what we've seen. But then we've also seen giant centers. Like I've been to 11,000 square foot centers where there's 7 or 8 physicians that are all practicing in one building. So again, it just depends on the market that they're in and where they are, population. All of those things are huge factors. And again, that kind of gets back to custom tailoring. Lucky thing is, man, I've seen over 350 of these clinics now all across the United States, couple in Europe, couple in Canada. So it frames a great perspective onto how a clinic should be laid out based on where the physician wants to put one of these buildings.
both geographically as well as how you actually lay it out.
And size wise, yeah.
Yeah. Huh. That's fascinating. Computing it, that's all.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're also tracking the MDMA decision. Do you have thoughts or plans on that, or is it too premature to get into?
I'm tracking it very closely. Obviously, from a portfolio standpoint on the VC side before we started the REIT, and then obviously for this, I think we're already the number one solution for ketamine providers in the United States from a real estate perspective. I think we'll very quickly be able to dominate that market too on the MDMA side. And there are specific requirements that I can't share yet
Yeah.
around the design for how these clinics are going to be laid out. But they're luckily, I've visited a lot of clinical trial sites where a lot of these drugs have been going through the clinical trial process. Got to see how the clinics are laid out, what rooms are best for experiences. There's a wide variety of factors that go into the design and layout of these things. Yeah, I think I'm very excited for it. I hope from a treatment standpoint, a lot of people don't know 9 million adults every year in the United States suffer from PTSD. It's not just veterans, it's firefighters, police officers, survivors of domestic violence, sexual abuse.
Yeah.
Post-traumatic stress is a very serious problem in the United States, and there hasn't been a new treatment option developed in over 20 years. From a treatment standpoint, I'm very excited that there is hopefully going to be a new option for people. That's one of the things I'm most excited about. So yeah, tracking it very closely.
Awesome, man. That's great. I guess on that subject, where do you see the future of your industry headed? What we talked a little bit about the MDMA, but what else is in store?
So I look at it from two different standpoints, right? The medical office building standpoint as a whole, it's just historically demonstrated remarkable stability, consistent rent growth. Healthcare is one of the very few things that will always be essential. So that's never going. We talked about work from home. Guess what? You're not getting your healthcare services from home. You're still going to the doctor for your dialysis, your MRI. Well, I've seen a lot of different apps and digital solutions be popping up for mental health issues. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of the mental health issues that we're experiencing are from a lack of connection and not having the relationships because everything being online. You think that us talking on the screen right now, while it does develop a connection more than a phone call, at the end of the day, there is something special to be said about sitting in a room
Hanging
with
out,
somebody.
having friends. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't care what type of healthcare, you still need to go see your doctor for that. And there's always going to be a strong demand for outpatient care and things like that. So that, again, from a risk management standpoint, I think it's the most stable asset class that you could possibly have when you're talking real estate. And then from the psychedelic side, I think you're going to see a very drastic change over the next decade of how we treat mental and behavioral health. And I think that a lot of these new therapies are going to be key drivers for that. Again, we're not talking about kind of band-aid solutions. We're talking about curative measures. We talked about Lycos, the MDMA company. One of the most amazing things, I think it was 85 or 86% of everybody that went through the clinical trials received meaningful impact in their symptoms going down. 71% of them showed no clinical diagnosis for PTSD after that treatment. We're talking about really changing healthcare as we know it. And it's not going to be so much as the band-aid approach going from drug to drug and being inside the healthcare system for your whole life. Hopefully these are, again, one-stop shops where you can be cured from what you're suffering from. That's my hope. And again, billions of dollars have been poured into this industry from a research standpoint, and it's going to take billions of dollars more to successfully commercialize some of these things. But I'm excited for both, man. I'm very much looking forward to the new treatments that are going to become available. I'm also really looking forward to the continual growth and stability of the MOB space.
Yeah. On the changing of these drugs from being Schedule 1 and don't you even think about it to now they're being adopted for therapy. Do you think that is it groups like MAPS that have pushed that forward? Is it guys like Joe Rogan talking about it on his podcast? What do you think have been the changing factors?
I think it's everything. MAPS has been, listen, man, 30 years they've been beating the drum. That is something that most people cannot even conceptualize, having one mission like that for that many decades. It's a really incredible thing. And them being able to use data to support what they're talking about, I think is a very important thing. Royal Imperial College of London has been at the forefront, obviously a very well respected medical school. They've been doing a lot of the clinical work, a lot of the development work on some of these new drugs that are just, listen, the FDA, they don't want full spectrum products. They want one thing to be one molecule to be able to go through the regulatory review process. A lot of the pharmaceutical types of psychedelics you're going to see are going to be related towards that. Johns Hopkins University has been incredible leading. Dr. Matthew Johnson is led up. He did their psilocybin smoking cessation study. He did their psilocybin end of life study. So I think having these institutions that are regarded as some of the highest in the world at what they do, that has helped tremendously. And then, yeah, having big voices talk about this. Joe Rogan, Elon Musk talked about ketamine. So I think, and then obviously several athletes. One of the co-founders here, who somebody I consider like a best friend now, Daniel Carcillo, it saved his life after he got to the NHL with psilocybin. So having athletes, entertainers, entrepreneurs, people like this talk about this, that kind of help. Listen, why does propaganda work? Because it's deep into the psyche, right? And having conversations around what some of these things are and what they do to destigmatize, I think is going to be a really important piece. So I think it's not just one thing. I think it's everything at once, right? That's creating that change.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, legalization of these things creates safety. If you're worried about the spread of the cartels and recreational drugs and all that, you don't know what anything is cut with, theoretically. And that's how some of these unfortunate deaths that are overdoses, that's abusing. But with what you're pushing, it's, hey, let's know exactly what's in it. Let's know the whole chain of title, essentially, of from when it was manufactured to how it got here. Let's administer it appropriately. And let's use it responsibly for what it's been proven to help people deal with. So I think it's awesome and amazing what you're doing.
Appreciate it, buddy. Listen, every day I'm super excited that I get to wake up and be at the forefront of hopefully what is going to be a radical change in how we treat some of these things. And it's been a fascinating journey to be a part of. And it's just getting started. Still the first inning.
Yep. That's awesome. Cody, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, maybe they've got the perfect MOB space or what have you, what would you say is the best way to be in touch?
Yeah, it's difficult not to get a hold of me. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. You can reach me, Cody, at healingrt.com. Our website, healingrt.com, is a contact us form. Send me a smoke signal. It's easy to reach me, man. I'm not hiding behind any gold walls. So
Yeah.
I'm an easy man to get in contact with. But yeah, anything. Listen, relationships with brokers, developers, investors, you name it. Listen, man, I'm happy to talk to everybody all the time.
That's great. And you're an easy guy to talk to. So that's a benefit.
I appreciate that, buddy.
Cody, this has been truly my pleasure. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having me on, brother. I appreciate it. And hopefully next year I can come back on here and give you some exciting updates of where we're at.
For sure. Absolutely.